It's been quite some time since I added to this playlist, and partly that's because the project shifted from being one of preparation and imagination into being one of actual play. And so rather than coming up with things for a future campaign, I was simply enjoying being in the campaign. Talking about magic is something that I've put off for a while, partly because any final decision would have to come from what the players had decided to play. I didn't want to put myself in a position, or put the players in a position, where I was saying, no, you cannot have this kind of magic. I preferred to be in a position where the players were free to develop a character type, and then we would together see how that could fit into what had already been designed as the basic framework. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are some things that I definitely did not want to have involved on the player side, and I made that known from the beginning, but I also let them know that I was open-minded about it. So, interestingly enough, that meant we ended up with no practitioners of theistic magic. We ended up with no sorcerers. We ended up with no animus, and animism was on the list of things I would prefer people not to take. We ended up with 2 practitioners of folk magic and 2 practitioners of mysticism, both the same people. And I hadn't really intended to have mysticism be a part of this fantasy, and so made no use of it myself in my own designs. But now that it's present, I'm very, very glad I decided to collaborate so freely with the players. Because of the nature of their involvement, and because of the merging of their creativity and mine, this campaign setting has grown into something that's special and beyond what I could have done on my own. The last time that we spoke about magic in this series, everything about magic and the campaign setting was still hypothetical. I was still trying to work out what effect my choices would have on the setting, and trying to identify what biases I might have, which might color or limit the freedom that I wanted the players to have as they entered into the character creation process. So, as I mentioned, animism and mysticism were going to be, if not outright excluded, were going to be not a part of how I was presenting the game world to the players. So, we got 2 players who chose mysticism. And this is interesting to me because one of the fundamental choices you need to make when you're setting up a game using the RuneQuest rules is about the recovery of magical potential. Now, just as a very quick overview, we talked about characters very early on in the series. One of the character's attributes is the power attribute, and it's used to derive a number of characteristics, and one of these characteristics is magic points. And, of course, like any point-based system, this is something that you spend in order to buy an effect in the game. So the different spells that you cast, or the different ways that you cast them, will cost varying amounts of magic points. And when you're trying to set the tone or the feel for your fantasy setting, the recovery of these points is an important choice. The faster they recover, the more magic will be present, the easier it will be to cast, and so on. And so, as I was shooting for a sword and sorcery feel, as I was going for a style of fantasy play that I had not experienced before in the past, I decided to go for a very slow rate of natural recovery. Now, there are other ways in the system and in my setting to speed this process along, but just letting nature run its course, a character who expends magic points will have them slowly return at a rate of 1 per week. Now, if you remember earlier on in the combat example where we pitted, a melee warrior versus a spellcasting warrior, we put them together, that spell would normally cost 3 magic points, meaning 3 weeks' time to recover that energy, which could be fairly significant. Now, of course, the character in that example rolled a critical success in their invocation, and so would have spent fewer magic points, but the point still stands. Every point you spend will not return until a week has elapsed in game time by natural means. Now, what are some unnatural means? They all involve accessing an external force, right? Making a sacrifice of some kind of creature and harvesting magic from that sacrifice. Finding a mystic site which is heavily laden with this energy and knowing how to siphon it off. This is another decision I needed to make. Would this be something that would happen naturally if the magic-using character were in such a mystical site? Would their rate of recovery happen without any activity on their part? Would they just naturally recover things faster, or would it require specialized knowledge to make use of that site? Again, to heighten that gritty nature of sword and sorcery and the difficulty of magic, and the give some motivation of why sorcerers are so unwilling to share and why they go off into these remote regions to do their to do their work. I made this decision. So it's all based around knowledge. Recovery of magic points, you have to know how to do it. You have to know how to enact your sacrifice and benefit from it. You have to know what to do if you find such a site charged with magical energy. Now, this magical energy, I couldn't, of course, in-game keep calling magic points. It had to be skinned. And so over time, this began to be represented as the divine force, right? The blood and breath of the deities who gave the firmament shape. This created a lot of spin-off designs throughout the setting as we went on, and we'll talk about those later. So what makes the choice of mysticism, to get back to mysticism, what makes that choice so interesting, as this is the one form of magic where the source of magical energy comes from within. Now, mechanically, it's still represented as magic points, and characters still spend them. But how they get them back is an internal process. And so I liked this contrast quite a bit. From one perspective, characters who use mysticism, whatever it's called, inside the game world, but to keep using its system name, mysticism. Characters who use that, when witnessed by outsiders, could be mistaken for not using magic at all. They could be seen as highly trained individuals pulling off incredible feats that most people would be too afraid or not know how to do. Mysticism affects the attributes. It affects the internal life of the character. This is not, hurling balls of ki energy or that sort of thing. This is raising your attributes or your secondary characteristics in order to pull off amazing feats, or more overtly mystical accomplishments like, adhering to a slick surface. Now, to the outsider, it looks like you're somehow able to climb up the wall, and maybe that's really all you're doing. Now, how practitioners of this art regain their magic points is through meditation, right? Entering a trance-like state and balancing their mind and harmonizing with the world, and I quite like this. So that will enable them to recover magic points at a slightly faster rate than other magic-using characters and traditions will be able to do. However, because mysticism is so thinly represented in the setting, it will be hard for them to learn new abilities. So, again, this it shifts their focus. It provides us with a different look at magic than would have existed if they hadn't made these choices. So it won't all be about, spells and making agreements and pacts with old sorcerers or with supernatural entities and that sort of thing to increase their power. It will be about developing mastery over abilities that they already have and, accessing their core, hardening their core in order to make this more and more effective over time. So this has some profound effects on the setting. So the next thing that both characters did was to create a reason for this magical art to exist. So one character, the character of Gorwyn, if you've watched the recaps, comes from a cult. Now, RuneQuest, this is, cults are a major part of the culture that surrounds play. And so the cult that the player invented is, the Life Sworn. And this is a cult that disguises itself as a guild which sells servants. I mean, for all intents and purposes, they are enslaving their members to the service of the highest bidder. And these are professionals. You might hire a bodyguard or a champion, that sort of thing, and you will find them to be more efficacious in combat than any normal warrior because their training, their loyalty, makes it so. The cult doesn't advertise that they have basically created or discovered a new form of magic in the firmament. People believe it's the training. The next player, who's playing one of the near-human races, one of the Plenthans, created a heresy to support his character's development of this internal magical ability. And so this enabled us to spin the culture in a very different way, where originally they were kind of stoic and based on self-sacrifice and privation. Now we have more political machinations going on in the background. Right? The priesthood has declared these powers as being heresy, and those people who believe that these powers are the natural birthright of Plenthan warriors are outcasts. So this enables me to create dogma in the priesthood of the Plenthans, which flies in the face of the actual teachings of the deity and the priests who came before, and the frontline experiences of warriors who, as they go through their training process, are uncovering these abilities within themselves. And we set up this conflict inside the culture of what does our God really want from us. So I like that quite a bit. The abilities that the characters chose, there's a lot of overlap, of course. And the Plenthans, if you remember from earlier clips, have been exiled to a subterranean culture where they must wage war against the forces of chaos, basically on a day-to-day or night-to-night existence. And so the powers manifested by our Plenthan aristocrat warrior, Turgid, he has the ability to see in darkness and, of course, increase his attributes or combative ability, and so on. And Gorwin, likewise, as a bodyguard, contracted out for life to his patron, who we often refer to as Master, until he was boiled alive. These abilities similarly manifest, these combative or martial abilities. And the characters will, of course, expand in other directions as play continues, providing that they can find someone to guide them along this path. So, that's mysticism. Folk magic, I wasn't sure if anybody would take it or not, and I kind of hoped that they would, and because this was one of the ways I was able to explain the kind of collaboration I really wanted in the setting. So, folk magic, for the folk in the setting, is not called folk magic, and in many cases is not even seen as magic at all. Its effects may be hidden, or they may take them for granted in such a way that they don't realize what's really happening. And as an extension of this, in many places they have lost the real secrets and are just going through empty form and empty ritual as a part of tradition or as a part of superstition. So the folk magic spell, Blade Sharp, enables you to take a tool and make it sharper. I mean, that's its effect, but this is a permanent effect. So this is a great example for how folk magic is shaped in the real world. How does this happen? Is it pointing a finger and uttering an invocation and bam, it's sharp? Well, it could be in a very high magic setting, which is not what I'm developing. So again, you take the best practices of a people or of a culture, and you combine it with tradition so that this is the way that you sharpen a blade. This is what you do when you receive a blade as a gift, or when you forge a blade yourself. And for those who know the secrets, for those who are doing it in tune with the principles, the effect is greater than it would be if you were simply sharpening it yourself. And so spells like heal or find, they all work in this way. As you travel across the firmament, you can find similar behaviors for similar activities happening, but you don't always find magical effects. And I like that. So my challenge to the players was to dress up these superstitions and these behaviors culturally, so that when folk magic entered into the game, we'd be getting insight into how their cultures operate. We haven't seen a lot of folk magic yet, mostly just healing as they keep wandering into peril. But even here, we have a culture, both Plinthon and human, of laying on of hands and then enacting sound first aid principles. I like that kind of practical nature. Sorcery is also tied to the culture of the setting that I developed. How do people learn it? This was one of the first questions that I wrestled with after I settled on how slow and difficult it would be to recover magic points. So again, I hit on this concept of the divine force. So there are mystic sites, there are ley lines, there are channels where the divine force flows, and there are places where it pools. And of course, people build temples in those places, and people have, let's say, a natural sensitivity to it. So if their power attribute is quite high, they might be more attuned to sensing this, and they might enter into the priesthood. And, the gods walk among them in the past. And for those who have their eyes, cast skyward, or have their minds on these heavenly beings, the priesthood is the natural place for them to end up. But not everybody's cut out to be a priest, and as world history shows us. So this is something I wanted to bring in. This is something that I felt that RuneQuest, and the way that it's written, and the way that character creation is done, and so on, it supports this kind of thinking. So I wanted the idea of theistic magic in the temples to not be the only thing. So I thought that the source of sorcery in the setting would be from the temples. And so what I started to envision were, the truly devout priests being granted knowledge from, from the divine beings in their pantheon. And this is where miracles come from. The priest negotiates. That theistic magic is a negotiation between the priest and their congregation and their deity. And so the priest serves as a focal point for the energy derived from worship. So in much the same way that a sorcerer learns how to take this divine force and turn it into magic points for themselves, the priest is using that divine force to transmute or filter the worship of their followers into a large devotional pool of magic points to use for miracles. If they are faithful enough, this miracle will work. These points will be spent, and change will take place in the firmament. Not all priests are devout, but they still need this ability, or they still desire this ability. They have this ambition, and maybe it's their ambition that means maybe it's their ambition that's blocking them from gaining access to these theistic miracles, and they don't get it. They don't understand it, and they try and penetrate the mystery. Their ambition, their cleverness pushes them onward. They try and understand, how is it that this bumpkin from the sticks can work miracles and I cannot? And these are the people that first became sorcerers in this setting, using the fragmentary knowledge about the runes and about the deities that passed down to them through the generations. While the first temples are being built, they clawed secrets of controlling elements of reality from this knowledge, and they became the first sorcerers. And of course, this kind of person doesn't always survive well in an organization. Sometimes they split off and form organizations of their own, and you can see where this is going. You have cults, and you have apostates, and you have people excommunicated for their behavior, each taking little fragments of this knowledge out of the temples and into the world, where, of course, eventually you may need an apprentice to do your dirty work for you, and again, things spread in different ways across the land. So this is the core kernel of sorcery. The last thing we need to talk about is animism. Now, this is something that is present in the setting, but is extremely rare for reasons which I really cannot divulge at this time because the game is still ongoing. But it will be possible for the characters to seek out shamans or people with ties to the spirit world. And they've just had a brush with it themselves. They've encountered a group of hungry specters or wraiths in an abandoned temple, which nearly cost them their lives. So they may feel vulnerable in this way, and they may want to seek out someone who is able to deal with that kind of threat. This would be a quest in and of itself. They might have to travel to a more barbaric or more primitive culture than their own in order to find someone who's still conversant with these old ways of dealing with the dead or dealing with spirits of the natural world. And because malevolent spirits of chaos within the campaign as it exists now have probably just been released on the world, this kind of rare knowledge takes on special meaning. So this then is a short kind of overview of how I'm actually using magic. We've chosen a very gritty sword and sorcery flavor to it by restricting the rate at which magic points regenerate, and also by making it possible to make this recovery rate faster if the characters are willing to enact some kind of bloody sacrifice or make a pact with otherworldly beings. This applies, to any magic practitioner in the setting, be they mystics or be they priests or what have you. We have tied one of the early conflicts in the setting to the development of a form of magic. So we have a conflict between those who can truly access theistic magic and those who are forced to develop sorcerer's powers in order to maintain their temporal power as priests without it. And we have talked about mysticism, the power from within, and how this might be represented as a mystery cult, or how it might be represented as an actual, in-your-face, open heresy, which is working at the fabric of the society from which it came. So, all of this from the fantastic toolkit, which is RuneQuest 6.